I'm glad to see so many of you, and for some of you who are listening in from outside of Singapore, it is a beautiful Thursday afternoon, November, and we have so many people, almost 400 people watching today. And the Mind Science Center's research focus is on dementia and depression prevention. But we also have many people who family members who have dementia, and they often ask us, what are the complications if people are on medication, and what can be done, and what are the new areas of research and new medication coming online. So I have two wonderful speakers today, Professor Tan Chee Hoon. The first is not only a doctor and a psychiatrist, but also a pharmacologist. So in Singapore, she's the first psychopharmacologist. And the other person is Dr. Yap. She's a pharmacist, also a lecturer in the university, and has done extensive research. So instead of asking them to give a lecture, we thought of changing the format. And because we find at the end of any lecture, there's often a lot of questions asked, and people often send us notes and say, these are the unanswered questions. So I thought maybe we should begin with the question that people have sent to me. And the first question is, all right, are supplements like vitamins good for memory? And I'm going to ask Professor Tan Chee Hoon.
Thank you, Professor Kwa. Is the volume okay for all of you?
Loud and clear.
Thank you. This question is asked often to us. I must make a very important disclosure. I'm not representing any company, any pharmaceutical company, or any drug company that make vitamins or supplements. So that is my disclosure. I'm going to say this statement by giving an illustration. Next slide, please. Oh, you can see there are two pots of plants here. Professor Kwa have a big garden, and he has a lot of plants. And I have a very small garden and small collections of plants. So we know that we give plants vitamins by their nutrients. And if you want flowering plant, you want fruiting plants, you want green leaves, wood leaves, then you give them different kind of vitamins. So the first thing is vitamins and minerals are essential for our memory. This is the first fact. So in my eagerness to help my plants, I give a lot of vitamins to the pot of plant. Within 1 hour, I saw my plant withered under my eyes. The moral of lesson is very clear. I give a lot of vitamins and minerals to my plant, and within 1 hour, my plant withered. So are vitamins good for our memory? The essential vitamins are important. And the question is, when is it useful? Next slide. Our memory, as Prof. Kwa said, the memory is an important function of our human. But to have memory, we need to have attention. All of us know important meeting, and we must have full attention. And after the full attention, we can have good recall because we store it in an important place and say we are going to recall it. So memory is made up of attention, storing in the brain, and recording them. There are multiple parts of memory. So we talk about supplement good for memory. What are we talking about? The best still good rest, good nutritious food, a functioning brain. That means we pay attention to our rest. A brain give you a good rest. Treat our anxiety, treat our depression, so we can have full attention. And then we can recall the appropriate information. So what is the best part for memory? It's essential nutrition, good attention, good storage, and good recall. Next question, Prof. Kwa.
Prof. Kwa, you're muted.
Prof Kwa is muted. Just go back, please.
So sorry, this question is for Dr. Yap. Can you buy all types of vitamins over the counter?
Behind, can we reverse the slide, please? Yeah. Okay, so you asked the question to Dr. Yap, yes.
Dr. Yap, yes. Can anyone go to the pharmacy and buy all the A to Z vitamins? Can they do that? Or there's some precaution that we have to be, when someone buy vitamins? What does the pharmacy tell them? Pharmacist tell them?
So basically, at the pharmacy or at any retail stores in Singapore, there are many different kinds of vitamins, supplements, they are readily available for sale to the general public. So in Singapore, usually what is found on the shelves do not require any prescription. However, there is benefit from perhaps speaking with a healthcare provider about your intention to take any supplementation, vitamins or minerals, especially if one is on existing medications for treatment of any diagnosed conditions. Because after all, there could potentially be some interactions between supplementation and medications that one could be taking. So it's definitely helpful to speak with your healthcare provider about any intention to take supplementations. Should there be a need to make appointments, or if your appointment is not upcoming, you can definitely walk into a community pharmacy, and I'm sure you will be able to find some helpful advice from the pharmacists who are on duty.
Thank you, Dr. Yap. When someone comes with memory problems, the doctors will do some screening. And one of the two types of vitamins they often check for are vitamin B12 and B6, folic acid, and also B12. So these are the vitamins that we often check to make sure. Sometimes the lowering of this vitamin can affect your memory, right? But a caution we have to tell people is, if you take too much vitamin, there's a condition called hypervitaminosis. And you have some, is it true, Professor Tan Jae-hoon, that you also have some side effects of having too much of vitamins?
Yes, rightly said. When we screen elderly with dementia or cognitive or memory problems, certain new deficiency, B12 is one, B6 is one, and then we also want to know what is being advertised and what is being claimed in the marketing brochure or advertisement. We must distinguish and the real evidence. So when we do the blood test, we need to supplement the deficient part of the vitamins. If too much vitamins, you can remember my plant. I give too much vitamins and the plant withered. So the human will suffer from consequences of extra vitamins.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Tan. Can we move on? Next question. What is ginkgo biloba, and can it improve memory? I'll ask Dr. Tan first to Dr. Yap. Dr. Tan, Prof. Tan.
Okay, so Dr. Yap is going to tell us more about ginkgo. When I was in Canada, there was a big ginkgo tree right in front of my apartment. And ginkgo biloba, most of the ginkgo biloba is not the cheng teng fruit. It's the leaves that make into ginkgo biloba extract in the capsule or tablet. The literature, the evidence, compared to the amount of brands, the many multiple brands of ginkgo, whether it can improve my memory or not. Back to my first sentence, we need to distinguish between what is advertised, what is marketing, brochure saying, compared to the real fact. Dr. Yap is going to tell us more details about ginkgo. Dr. Yap.
Thanks, Prof. Tan. Thanks, Prof. Kwa. Again, I will first and foremost declare that I am not representing any company. And what was presented here is basically from evidence from published literature. And as Prof. Tan has mentioned earlier, when we are referring to ginkgo, we're not talking about the dessert or the seeds that we put in the chengteng. It is an extract from the leaves of the ginkgo biloba tree. And there are many brands of supplements that contains ginkgo biloba extract. However, the most widely studied in clinical trials as well as preclinical trials are from a specific extract formulation called the EGB 761. And what this EGB 761 contains is 6% of terpenes as well as 24% of flavones. And these two components, or rather many components of these two classes, form the medicinal properties of what is contained in the ginkgo biloba extracts. Maureen, if you could advance to the next slide. Yeah. So what has been published and widely studied is actually the EGB 761. And the evidence has now culminated into some recommendations from an expert panel to show that there could be some benefits in helping to improve symptoms for people who have demonstrated mild cognitive impairment or diagnosed with dementia. However, this also means that it's not just any ginkgo supplementation that we purchase off the shelf, but it has to be a specific product that contains this EGB 761 formulation.
Okay.
Yeah. And basically, I also would like to provide a little bit more of information pertaining to ginkgo biloba extracts and the reported side effects and some of the precautions for use. I think what is most significant to note is that from the medicinal effects of ginkgo biloba, it does have some properties to help to thin the blood. And because of that, it helps to prevent blood clots and thus promotes blood circulation to the brain cells and the body as well. So because of this effect, there could be a possibility of side effects in terms of bleeding. And on the next slide, the implications of this is therefore to definitely watch out and not recommend ginkgo biloba for any individuals, but to be cautious in recommending for those who are existingly on any blood thinning medications or anticoagulation medications, because there could potentially be interactions between ginkgo biloba extracts and these medications in increasing the risk of bleeding. And with other medications, there could also be interactions that would reduce the effectiveness of medications that the person is already taking. So definitely speak with your healthcare provider if you do intend to use any of these ginkgo biloba supplementations, of course.
Thank you very much. I think that's very informative. Some of you may know that the ginkgo tree is supposed to be the oldest tree in the world. It survived the days of the dinosaurs. And so every time patients will ask us with poor memory, can I take this ginkgo biloba? And as the evidence, as Dr. Yap mentioned, it's better for people who are in the mild cognitive impairment phase. Sometimes it's called a pre-dementia phase. But we realize that once you have dementia, it's not as helpful. But the caution, as she's mentioned, is the bleeding. And I've seen a patient who was in my clinic and was referred with a complaint of blood in the urine. And went for all investigations, x-rays, MRI scanning. And the doctor forgot to ask the patient, are you taking ginkgo biloba? If you know that, stop it and the bleeding stopped altogether, because he was also on aspirin, also on warfarin. Let us press on to the next question. A very interesting question asked by lots of, not by the students, but by the mothers of students. The mothers often ask, is ginkgo good for my kids? Yes. Next week is the, I think, O-level exams, and people are using it, asking whether it's helpful. So, Professor Tan Chee-Hoon, what do you think?
Yeah, I think all of us are very concerned about kids study for exam. This question, whether it is good for kids to study for exam, if ginkgo is part of the supplement that they take day in and day out without any side effect, versus just before exam and you give the kids some new brand of ginkgo first time, then you take a risk about side effect that developed. If I were the mom, I wouldn't take this a risk just studying for exam, but it is part of the supplement. I observe them not having side effect, go ahead. So I always said, if you have taken this without side effect, go ahead. But you must watch out for. In children, they're not taking blood thinner, so the bleeding or the risk of bleeding is not there. But there is no evidence. I remember I mentioned advertising, marketing versus evidence. So studying for exam, there's no evidence that ginkgo improved exam results, unless we do a huge study, and it's very difficult to make it clinically significant because there are so multiple factors in preparing for exams. Not just a drug or a supplement can fix a problem of studying for exam. There are multiple factors.
Correct, Prof. Tan. Then they often ask us, what are different types of ginkgo medications in the market that we can buy? So the next question is for Dr. Yap. What are different types of no, there's a question before that. Different types of ginkgo biloba extracts. Has it been asked? Has it been answered? Dr. Yap?
Yeah, thanks, Prof. Kwa. So about the ginkgo supplementations, I think we see a lot of advertisements on ginkgo supplementations, but pertaining to the one that is widely studied with recommendations by the expert consensus panel, I recall seeing two brands available. One is called Tanakan. It comes in 40 mg per tablet. The other one is Tabonin, comes in 120 mg per tablet. If I'm not wrong, Tanakan might be available on sale, but then again, with regards to the recommendations, it's best to seek a provider's recommendation and to inform your prescriber if you have the intention to start on these medications so that you can be properly monitored for. Yeah.
Okay, so the next question is for Professor Tan Chee-Hoon. What are the common medications for Alzheimer's disease? Alzheimer's disease is the commonest type of dementia. Prof. Tan?
The reply to Professor Kwa is there are common medicine for Alzheimer's disease, but we must bear in mind it is not a cure. Also, when we talk about medication for Alzheimer's disease, are we talking about the improvement of memory or a slowing down of their memory deterioration? Or are we talking about the emotions of the Alzheimer's disease or the behavioral aspect of patient with Alzheimer's disease? So common medications used for Alzheimer's disease very often can be the behavioral part, because if the person having no memory, it doesn't disturb people. But if the person had Alzheimer's disease, start to take water from the commode and use it as water for everybody to drink, or you start to smear fecal material on the switches. So we're talking about common medication, whether for the memory or for the behavior or for the emotion. So there are different aspects, but we know for a certainty, there's no cure. There's no cure for Alzheimer's disease. If a person can determine that, then they will get a Nobel Prize. Currently, there are two big classes of drug for treatment. They call that treatment prescription drug for Alzheimer's. And one is a big group called acetylcholine inhibitor. It's a big word, and there are examples. Then there's another big word, MMDA antagonist. The example is memantine. We want to make it simpler by having a picture. Is it okay to have a picture? Next slide. Okay. So you and I, all in the audience, 300 people, we all have neurons in the brain. Our brain talk to each other, and we require this chemical called acetylcholine. You can see the acetylcholine is the yellow and the green thing. We need the acetylcholine to communicate to each other. But very quickly, this acetylcholine is broken down by this component called acetylcholine esterase. You can see the fork going around to break it down, it chopped it up. So this chop it up enzyme is not nice. So we develop a drug, acetylcholine esterase inhibitor, to stop this from chopping up the acetylcholine. That's how it worked. This drug that has been discovered to chop up this enzyme so that it doesn't disturb the acetylcholine. That's how this drug works, okay? Next, for the severe dementia or moderate to severe dementia, it's called memantine. Again, it's a wonderful discovery, and we are still continuing to research to find out more about this drug. But it is a fantastic chemical because when the two neurons talk to each other, another chemical is called glutamate. But too much glutamate is no good, but too little also no good. So we all need a right proportion of the glutamate in the brain. We need the right proportion. And memantine, as the slide tells you, it can keep the amount of glutamate. We call it modulated. It's so fantastic. It goes to the neuron, in between the neurons, regulate the amount. So that is to treat. Again, when the word treat, it is sometimes to delay the memory decline of patient with Alzheimer's disease. Sorry, I hope I'm talking sense, Professor Kwa.
There are some people who asked the question in the Q&A, and I think Professor Tan has answered some of the questions on the types of medications. Let me move on to another question that's been asked can you put on the slide, please? Are the medications for all the degrees of dementia? I think, Prof. Tan, can you just repeat what you have said so that people understand all this?
Okay. So Prof. Kwa earlier on mentioned there is a condition called pre-dementia, mild cognitive impairment. So some people take ginkgo. But for the treatment, the doctors, the physician, the geriatrician, they want to delay. They want to make the memory decline slower, so that physician treat with drugs. So for mild and moderate, they use the acetylcholine esterase inhibitors. For the more severe one, moderate to severe, they will add on from esterase inhibitor, add on a memantine, so become 2 drugs.
Okay, very good. I think you covered the particular area quite well. Someone also asked about the Exelon patch. Maybe Dr. Yap, you know, tell them what's the Exelon patch.
The Exelon patch?
Yes, there's a question about Exelon patch. Or maybe probably I'll take over because some elderly patients have difficulty in swallowing. And so the scientists have come out with something interesting. Instead of swallowing, you put a patch on the, just like at the Chinese koyo, you know, they put a patch, then it can absorb through the skin. So it's especially in Exelon. They don't have it for the other kind of medication. Okay, next question, please. Okay, so for these medications that you have mentioned, Prof. Tan, what are some of the side effects?
Next slide, I think it's shown in the slide.
Next slide. Yeah.
Yeah, so when you start this medication, Professor Kwa also these patients when they come back after taking these drugs for to improve their memory, we have this whole list of side effects. But what is common? We want to tell them if it affects their sleep, then we want to give them in the daytime. But if you make them lightheaded, then you tell them when you change your position from sitting to standing, a bit slower, go a bit slower. If you suddenly stand up from a sitting position or lying position, you may fall. Same as for drowsiness, headache. So some of these things we had to be careful. But by and large, they can go away after a while. We call it tolerance. A person develop tolerance. If they have it, you need to tell your physician so that they know how to adjust the dose. Sometimes related to the dose. Nausea is quite often, so you tell them to take with food. Don't take empty stomach. When you take with empty stomach, then the nausea is worse. So these are little things that we can tweak. If there's constipation, there's diarrhea, then we have to tweak from there. Constipation, we drink a bit more, take a bit more liquid. But if they have diarrhea, then we tell them how to adjust their food and diet. So these are common things, but it can be adjusted. The dose can be adjusted and tell them what to do with the side effect.
Yeah,
Doc,
maybe
anything to add? Someone asked, does it affect the heart rate and the blood pressure?
Yeah, maybe I jump in to add on to the question posed by Prof. Kwa. I was looking for the question on the chat earlier, and I'm not sure if there are any specific queries about the Exelon patch, but essentially it is just a different dosage form for one of the acetylcholine esterase inhibitors called rivastigmine. So instead of taking orally, it would be delivered through a patch that is applied to the skin and to be changed on a 24-hour basis, so one patch a day kind. And now whether it is in a patch form, oral form, as mentioned by Prof. Tan earlier, with regards to the side effects, generally we can look at it from the perspective of common side effects as listed here, as well as severe side effects, but which are rare. And for the common side effects, Prof. Tan already mentioned that what is important is for the individual to know how to manage them and what to do should these common symptoms not go away, which is to voice out to the healthcare provider or the prescriber if they feel that it continues to be intolerable. Next slide, please. With regards to some of the rare side effects, they could include fits, mood changes, or seeing things or hearing things that may not be present. Rightly put, there could be sometimes, very rarely, some side effects on the heartbeat, where the individual may feel a little bit uncomfortable or feels slow or irregular heartbeat, difficulty passing of urine, exhibiting changes in the urine color, or even having severe stomach pains, vomiting of blood, black tar-like stools, and so on and so forth. However, these side effects are very rare. And if you do experience any of these side effects, what is important as a behavior to do at home is to quickly stop these medications and to inform your prescriber as soon as possible, so that we could continue to monitor to see if these side effects are all right, and also to consider other alternative treatments. So these are basically the summarized list of side effects from medications that are used to treat Alzheimer's diseases. Maureen, next slide, please. Sorry, yeah. So, well, I think it's a lot of information out there, and there are a lot of information specific to different medications. And I also see in the chat that there was a question to ask specifically about the side effects of donepezil. What would be helpful, I thought, is to highlight that there is a very easy to read reference that has been curated on Health Hub, which is a platform that anyone with an internet could get access to. And I've provided the QR code on the screen. So if you scan the QR code, basically it brings you to a site where you can key in the medication name, and it will provide a lot of information that is specific to the different medications. So you could check up on the side effects and what to do to manage them, and also to identify what would be the rare side effects that you may want to monitor for when you are put on these various medications at home. Prof. Kwa.
Maureen, to flip back to the second medication called of Exelon. So someone was talking about Exelon patch. So it is, but people found it difficult to swallow, so they came up with a patch. Yeah. Okay. Let us press on to the next question. Do sleeping pills affect memory? And this is a very common question asked by many people. Prof. Tan again, Tan Chee Hoon.
This is a very important question, and if I can later on invite Prof. Kwa to comment, because Prof. Kwa was my teacher in many years ago. I shall not review how many years ago, so you review the ages of us, and about sleeping pills. And it is a common question. Do sleeping pills affect memory? Many elderly have sleeping problems, and many of them take sleeping pills. And the next day, the mother, I have a patient coming to me for investigation for dementia. And after you take your proper history, the elderly went to the market, bought this amount of food. She came back. She went back again. She went to market and bought the same amount of the same thing. And the daughter said, why do you do this? And the thing is, she didn't see it wrong because she said, I bought this thing. And the daughter brought the mother for investigation for dementia. And in the history taking, she just taken sleeping pill the night before. So that is the answer to you. Do sleeping affect memory? The answer is obvious. Professor Kwong to add on and chime in for this.
Maybe ask Dr. Yap first. Anything else you want to add before I chime in? Yeah, Dr. Yap, anything that you observe in your teaching, also seeing patients in the? I know Dr. Yap been helping out in the old people's homes, doing her research down there. Do you see a lot of old people there on sleeping pills?
Yeah, so I think in terms of helping with sleep-related issues for older persons, the recommendation is always to try non-drug methods, such as avoid taking naps in the daytime, providing a conducive habit of sleep, habits like turning down the lights, avoid stimulating activities just before bedtime, avoid the use of mobile phones before bedtime, to help to see if the sleep issues can improve without the need for medications. I think one main thing to note is also to avoid using over-the-counter treatment for sleep issues, especially for older patients, because the over-the-counter medications also contain some other side effects that could impact on memory. So another thing about sleep issues is sometimes they could also be associated with underlying medical conditions. Therefore, if the sleep issues do not get better over time with non-drug strategies, it is a good idea to seek medical attention to identify what could be related to these sleep issues and appropriately treat the underlying conditions rather than to resort to over-the-counter sleep medications.
Okay, thank you very much. Sometimes there are a lot of misconception about the duration of sleeping time. So you see, babies sleep about 16 hours or 17 hours. As we grow older, we don't need that kind of long sleep, the big sleep. And so sometimes the newspapers, the reporters will ask doctors, they say, well, 8 hours. 8 hours will be okay for a young person. But as one grows older, we don't need really 8 hours. If you have 6 hours or 5, and you're quite comfortable with, I think you should carry on with that, 5 to 6 hours. Because some people tell me that, oh, I've read in the newspaper, the reporters said people must sleep of 8 hours sleep, and therefore they'll demand from the doctors or some sleeping pills. And one of the problems with the sleeping pills is a very prolonged effects on when you wake up in the morning, you can still be a bit groggy, especially you grow older, the breakdown or the metabolism of these pills are slow, and therefore you may have a bit of hangover, and it affects your concentration. Before the fact that concentration, you can have difficulty in remembering, your awareness is gone, and therefore you cannot remember what you have done or what you've taken. So this kind of effect sometimes have the wrong idea. People think that I'm probably having memory problems. It's often slowly reducing the dosage of the medicine and taking them off. But when someone was prolonged and a high dose, there's some studies in the UK that there's possibility a risk factor for someone could have a memory problem. But underlying issue could be that this person has also, besides sleeping problem, a depression. So depression itself is a risk factor for dementia affecting memory itself. So it's a combination of both. Okay, but as Dr. Yap mentioned, there are so many non-drug approach that we can use. Exercise is wonderful. You go and walk in the parks. The CEO of NParks asked me, "Do you all suggest a park prescription?" I said, "We do all the time to all our patients. Go for a walk in the rainforest, or do gardening." All these are very healthy activities that will help you to sleep better. And as she mentioned about caffeine, I know some students, and now the exams coming up next week in the universities, students are trying to keep themselves awake, and they'll drink a lot of coffee, and later on when exams over, they complain of sleep problem again. So we want to be careful of the diet. And of course, people with sleep problems, sometimes the mind be wandering around. So we teach them some methods of mindfulness practice to help them to calm the mind down. I want to press on the next question, and it's
3 Q&As on melatonin.
There
is 3 Q&As on melatonin since it's related.
Okay, melatonin. Okay, there's some people asking about melatonin. Professor Tan Jae-hoon, melatonin.
All of us have melatonin in our brain, so there are supplements that you can find on the shelf. There are different dosages, some 5 milligrams, some 3 milligrams. Some people find it is helpful. So if you trial the non-medication method and it doesn't work, then you can try taking your melatonin. If one brand doesn't work, be careful, and you can try another brand, but be careful again, read the advertisement messages and try it out slowly. And what Professor Kwa said, check your amount of caffeine, check amount of sleep hour you need. So just be aware that you want to try melatonin, also be careful. Do some exercise, try the non-medication first, although people try melatonin, which is quite harmless.
Thank you very much, Prof. Tan. We have the press on time is not on our side. Next question, please. What other medication can cause poor memory? So back to Prof. Tan again, what kind of medications?
So we mentioned about sleeping pill can be one of them. Sleeping pill is one of them.
Okay.
Many institutions have done that kind of study. But the common causes of poor memory is just not drug. You can see the last item, benzodiazepine and sleeping pills. Some medication, some drug that used for example, anti-cancer drug may also affect the sleep. Alcohol can affect the quality of sleep. But other more common causes for poor memory is poor concentration, poor attention, not having enough sleep the day before, and stress and anxiety and depression. And these can cause poor memory.
Okay. Prof, Dr. Tan, Dr. Yap, anything to add to this question? Medication causing poor memory.
Yeah, indeed. There are certain medications and I am speaking particularly about avoiding these medications to older patients. Marie, on the next slide, please. Yeah, so these are taken from a consensus panel called the Beers criteria that recommends avoiding the use of these medications, especially for older patients, because of the probability of these medications worsening cognitive function. And generally, they all have a commonality, which is they have side effects that are anticholinergic in action. So take, for example, one of the most commonly used flu medications in Singapore, chlorpheniramine. It causes drowsiness, but it also has a very strong cholinergic effect, which could therefore have the probability of worsening cognitive impairment. The other medications is hydroxyzine. That is a very common medication used by people with urticaria or rash. So it stops itching. But again, for a person who already has some cognitive impairment, it is best to avoid because it can lead to confusion. Other medications include dimenhydrinate, which is commonly used for motion sickness, diphenhydramine, which can be found in some over-the-counter sleeping aids. Orphanadrine is a muscle relaxant, often taken by people with muscle stiffness or back aches, and it's commonly included in this medication brand name called Anorex. So this component called orphanadrine also falls under this category of medications with anticholinergic side effects. So altogether, I would say that these are the things to take note of, to perhaps speak to the pharmacist if you were looking for over-the-counter treatment of medications that does not contain anticholinergic side effects.
Thank you, Dr. Yap. As Prof. Tan mentioned, cancer medicine sometimes cause poor memory because the cancer drug also affect the brain. I remember one of the oncologists asking me this question. I told him maybe it's the depression that is why they have poor memory. And now they realize that the cancer drug can also affect the brain cells. Another drug that some people talk about is the steroids, can sometimes also affect memory. Okay, one more question, please. How should we keep or store medication at home? So something for Dr. Yap, because some people ask me, should I keep medicine in a refrigerator or should I keep it in a drawer? What's the safest place or best place to keep medication?
Sure.
I just 1 second. There's a question in the Q&A. Can I just, because it's along melatonin, is it okay for me? Go ahead.
Sure. Carry on.
Because you said, is there a preference for melatonin prolonged release over the OTC melatonin? So for the person who asked this question, is there are different type of sleeping problem. Some have difficulty falling asleep. Some have difficulty sustaining their sleep. Some have early awakening, like 4 o'clock, they wake up and they cannot sleep. So you have to look at individual and then you see which one is good for them. Because a slow release is different from the acute release. So not all the sleeping problems are the same. So you have to try it out to see what suits that particular person. Okay, thank you.
Okay, all right. Dr. Yap, you want to carry on with this?
Sure, thanks, Dr. Marie, if you could show the next slide. So I think pertaining to medication storage or optimal storage conditions, again, different medications would have different requirements. And even different brands of the same medication, because of the different dosage forms, may also contain very specific advice for what is optimal storage in order to make sure that the medication remains good for use, effective, and safe. I would therefore point towards the reference that I have provided to everyone earlier on the slide, which is on Health Hub. If you have any inquiries for specific medications, definitely go into that resource that can provide quite specific recommendations. However, what I would like to perhaps use this opportunity is to help everyone make sense of what some of the general advice that you may see on medication packages too. So what is usually referred to as a medicine that needs to be protected from light and moisture, it means that it is best to let the medication be stored in its original packaging. For example, some patients may like to use pill boxes. So they may punch out the medicines from the foil packaging into a 7-day pill box or a monthly kind of a pill box. But do take note that for medications that requires to be protected from light and moisture, it is best to let the medicine remain inside the foil packages and remove them only right before taking it. In that way, because the foil basically keeps out any light or moisture. So that is definitely something to take note of. Another thing pertaining to protection from light and moisture is, of course, recapping of medicine's bottle immediately after taking one pill or tablet out. And another thing to note is to, as Prof. suggested, it may be a good idea to keep it in drawers because sometimes leaving it at the tabletop where it's placed next to a window may expose the bottle of medicines to direct sunlight. And so it is definitely not a good idea if the medicines is required to be protected from light. The second point about storing in a cool place. What does it mean for us in Singapore? Because I think the weather is changing quite rapidly. It can be 25 degrees one day and it goes up to 30 degrees another day. So basically storing in a cool place generally refers to a temperature of a room temperature of 25 degrees Celsius. I think it's quite difficult to switch on the aircon all the time just because we have medications at home. But again, storing it in a drawer that is away from direct sunlight may definitely help to keep the temperature constant and ensure optimal storage. Another thing to note about storing in a cool, dry place is to keep away from the kitchen, especially areas where there's open fire or cooking involved. I'm saying this because sometimes we like to keep our medicine cabinets in the kitchen. So that may not be an appropriate thing to do if a lot of medicines needs to be stored in a cool place. Bathrooms as well, because we like to shower in hot water and the temperature in the bathroom and the humidity can definitely rise. So I would imagine that the bedroom would be a good place, or maybe the dining area or some place where it can easily remind you to take medications, especially if you need to take them on a daily basis. The third point about refrigerating and do not freeze, this pertains to only specific medications that needs to be stored under a temperature of 2 to 8 degrees Celsius. So not all medicines needs to be stored in the fridge. I'm saying this also especially with regards to medications that are in a medicine bottle. Storing them in the fridge is not a good idea because when we take them out from the fridge to consume, what happens is that the tablets are cold and there could be condensation of moisture onto the tablets, and it would be better to store them in room temperature rather than to keep them in the fridge if a temperature of 2 to 8 degrees Celsius is not an optimal storage condition for the medicines. So definitely keep only the fridge items in the fridge, such as insulins, especially if they are not used. And the last point, of course, do keep the medications in a proper place so that and keep it out of reach from children. Otherwise, they may accidentally consume the medications and suffer the side effects or adverse consequences.
Okay, we have one last question. Move on, please. Over-the-counter compounds like curcumin, are they helpful for memory? So I'll give Kai-Chen the rest first and then ask Prof. Tan again. Curcumin, you can buy over the counter. Is it helpful for memory?
I want to repeat the same sentence again. We need to distinguish between the advertising and the medical claims from the evidence of medical sciences. Curcumin has been researched, and curcumin has nice active ingredient that helped the neurons. And many of the curcumin active ingredient has been developed into anti-cancer for that purposes. So curcumin has very nice things. The very interesting statement that was made is if curcumin is useful for memory, then we expect that people who take a lot of curcumin, they have no dementia problem. The evidence is not there, not there. So many people who talk about curcumin, again, what is being put on the shelf and what is the active ingredient of curcumin, we had to be very careful what we are buying. It also can affect some of the bleeding tendency, more effect than memory. So we have to beware of the drug-drug interaction before even it can help with the memory. Professor Kwan. In short, it is still depending on the evidence and very difficult to claim the evidence at this time.
Dr. Yap, over-the-counter medicine, medical compounds.
I agree with what Prof. Tan has mentioned. It's difficult to recommend one brand over another simply because we don't have published evidence pertaining to its use in large-scale studies. Yeah.
And also, I think maybe I want to add one short sentence for the audience. The regulation for Western medicine is very stringent by FDA, and Singapore is called HSA. Whereas over-the-counter vitamins and supplements do not require that kind of regulation. So if you go to HSA website, you see that it's all up to the importer to declare that they don't have contamination, they don't have adulteration with other things, they don't have misidentification. All they need to do is just declare, but they don't have to be examined and assessed and evaluated by HSA. So totally two different regulations. So anybody, you can bring in something and put it on the shelf and just declare that I don't have adulteration or contamination, and you can sell that on the shelf. And you can call that Kwa, Dr. Yap's brand, or Professor Kwa's brand, or Tan Chee Hoon's brand. Good for memory.
Well, thank you, Prof. Tan. We're working on that, getting a concoction that's good for memory. Some years ago, the department, we published a paper. We found that in the big survey in Singapore, the people who eat curry has left them cognitive decline, besides memory, also concentration. It was just a survey. It wasn't a very randomized control study. It was just a survey of people's dietary habit. Then it was published in the American Journal. And it came out in the newspapers, the New York Times and also Australian, that curry is good for the brain. And so the curry itself has curcumin and turmeric, which are very helpful. But a lot of controversy involved in that, and people say, well, eat curry, what about the meat inside there, what about the rice you take? So there are lots of other issues that we got to grapple with. But because of that, many people already come out with a tablet, a curcumin tablet. You can buy it over the counter, and some friends of mine who are also doctors take curcumin tablets. They told me, Well, so it looks like diet is something very close to our hearts as Singaporeans, and even for people overseas. I know that a couple of people are listening from Malaysia. So we are thinking that maybe in the next webinar, we should have something on nutrition and memory, nutrition, and dementia, something that is on the cards. But as there are more questions, Maureen here told me that since we started late, we should give them extra time. So we're going to give a few more minutes for all of you. But I want to mention certain points. Someone asked also about Chinese medicine. Traditional Chinese medicine, are they helpful? So that's another area that we were going to talk about in the different webinar on TCM? Are they helpful? And what are the TCM which are helpful? Someone also asked in the Q&A about piracetam. Piracetam has been used, I think, over 30, 40 years ago for people with dementia, but I've used it a couple of times, but I didn't find it helpful. But maybe it acts something like the ginkgo biloba. Maybe it's for people in the pre-dementia phase. And someone asked also, is there a silver bullet for dementia? The answer is no. There is a book written by all of us in the research done in a department called The Colors of Aging. I hope you'll get a copy of the book. The book has been reviewed in the British Journal, and the reviewer, who is Professor Jeremy Holmes from King's College, he mentioned that this book called Colors of Aging should be read by Bill Gates, because Bill Gates, before the pandemic, told the world that he'll give $100 million for whoever can find a drug for the prevention of dementia. So this reviewer from King's College said, you can never find a drug. You should read this book from Singapore on dementia prevention and what we are doing here in Singapore, a non-drug approach. And some of the data have already been published also in a book that's just been released called Aging with Dignity. You can get a copy in the local bookstores. And finally, someone asked also about the tau proteins and the medication use. The medicine been used for many years, been tried for many years, not used, is the methylene blue to focus on the tau protein. So far, the results has not been too optimistic, you know. And a big study also done at Boston. I spoke to people in Boston. They don't find it that helpful, unfortunately. So I think I just allow one more question to anybody else who would. Dr. Yap, anything else you would add before I move on to? Yes, Dr. Yap, anything else?
I just noted that there was a question about expiry date of medicines. I just want to tap on the question to talk about some medications such as NGSAT for the heart and eye drops or even insulins that after opening or first use of these medications, there is an sort of a date in which the medicines should be discarded. For example, for the case of NGSAT, it should be discarded 2 months after opening. For insulins, 4 weeks after opening. For eye drops, 4 weeks after opening. This is really to ensure that the medicines are still good, continue to be effective, and in the case of eye drops is to definitely reduce contamination. So about the questions about expiry date, is it rigid or flexible? I suppose for effectiveness and safety of medicines, definitely do not use medicines beyond expiry date. And do take note of instances like these where medicines that are not used on a regular basis, but on an as needed basis, to take note when to discard the medications and not continue to let it sit in the medicine cupboards.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Yap. Prof. Tan has to run off to run a clinic, unfortunately. But before I end, I want to thank Professor Hong Hai. I think he's listening in. It is from his financial support that we have started a Dementia Asia website and also this regular webinar. We want to thank Prof. Hong Hai, who is the previous Dean of the Business School in NTU. So I'll leave it now, all of you, with Maureen, who has some announcement to make. Maureen?
Okay, so everyone, we have come to the end of the webinar because we don't have time, and I know that there's a lot of questions, but not to worry. We will be giving all these questions to the panelists, and we will be writing a highlight article on this webinar. Will be coming up soon. It's going to be published on our website, mindsciencecenter.sg. You can check it out, or you can also follow our Facebook page at Mind Science Center, so you can always be in the loop with any of our news and any of our events. If you still have any questions, you can also just email me at maurose@nus.edu.sg. If you have seen the poster for today's webinar, you will see my email there. You can send all your questions to me and I will forward them to the panelists today. So a really huge thank you to everyone who has joined us this afternoon. Thank you so much to Prof. Tan, to Dr. Yap, to Prof. Kwa also, who has come and give us a very insightful session today. I hope it has definitely given me a lot of information. So I do hope that you guys have some key takeaways and also some tips and tricks on memories and medication. So we really hope to see you again in our next event. So please help us fill this a very short feedback form. It will really help us in planning for our next event. So if you have any topics that you would really like to hear from us, please just tell us and we'll try to arrange that next time around. So thank you so much for today.